In case you missed our in-class demo, I'll use this video to quickly go over the basics of taking a character and using DUIK to set up a rig. Now I've created a character called Office Bean Worker in Adobe Illustrator. It's a vector-based character, and one easy way to bring that asset into After Effects is simply navigate to the folder where we've stored that file and have this window small enough that we can also see After Effects in behind it. We can just drag this file directly into the project panel, and we'll be presented with an import dialog. Now by default it's going to want to import it as footage, which is actually not a good choice for us here. It's going to force us to either flatten the layers together, and there's a different layer for the arm on the left side, the arm on the right side, the legs, and the body. So I've got actually 5 different layers, and keeping them separate is sort of important to making this rig work. So instead of footage, let's choose composition. And for the layers, the footage dimensions, I'm just going to say let's use the size of the document as I made it in Illustrator. And we can always change the composition size later on anyways. So if I hit OK, we'll see that we now have a comp, if we double click on it, where we've got our 5 layers and our Office Bean Worker. Now you actually can't see any legs, and that's because I've given this character black pants. So before we proceed any further, we may want to change the background color for our composition. We can do that by going up to the composition menu and choosing composition settings. And the very bottommost option lets us pick a different color for a background color. So I'll choose something light that's going to be give us good contrast for both the legs, which are dark, and the arms, which are kind of high key. So I'll choose OK, and we'll say that that's fine. Now if I were to solo any of these layers, we can see sort of how these different things have been constructed, right? The legs overlap with the arms. I guess another way is we could just break the character apart, right? I could take the 2 arms, take the legs, and we could see sort of all the different component building blocks for this character. And this is a really simple character. More complex rigs will break down things like the arms into maybe the upper arm, the lower arm, the hand, perhaps even each finger, or the like different joints of a finger. It's the sort of thing where it can really get quite complicated. For our demo, we chose something really quite simple just to see how it works, right? And if it's something that you're really interested in, by all means, it could be pretty cool to go deeper with this yourself. I'm just going to Control Z a few times to put our character back together. And when we're setting up the rig, we're going to basically create puppet pins that will allow us to specify points where we can deform each of these layers. Now to show you what I mean by that, let's solo just the left arm. So if I check this box in the solo column, we can see now that we just have a view of the one arm. Now I'd like to pick the puppet pin tool. This is along the top. Control P selects it. And maybe just to add a visualization here, let's also check the box beside show mesh. And this will show us some of the underlying math that's happening here. Now it will appear when we place our first pin. We're going to want to basically for each appendage have 3 pins, kind of one at each of the endpoints and one at the middle where a joint would occur. So I'm going to click up kind of where the shoulder would be, and if I click once, we'll see this underlying subdivision of triangles, right? And this is a polygonal mesh that sort of represents the math that's going to happen when we do some deformations. Let's add a pin where the elbow would be and a pin where the hand would be. Now if I grab a pin, we can see that a deformation occurs by basically like restructuring that triangular mesh, and then the vector image underneath deforms along with it. And because this was made as a vector, it actually deforms quite well, right? We don't lose a lot of quality, and that's kind of one of the underlying principles that allows these rigs to work. Now we want to build our rig kind of in this neutral pose, so we won't actually change the position of these pins. Once we've set up those 3, the next step is to find them in the layers palette. We can see that by just creating those pins, it's already opened up this puppet pin area, and we've got this mesh that we're working on. And if we expand this further, we can see we have some control over the number of triangles in the mesh. The expansion is kind of how far beyond the actual drawing that the mesh goes. And if you want to tweak a rig, these are things that you can kind of change on a per layer basis. But if we're happy with the defaults, which I think in this case we are, let's just look in the deform area here, and we can see those 3 puppet pins that we just created. If I select these 3 puppet pins, we can use DUIK's controls to turn them into bones. And we can do that by going up and finding the area that says bones, and if I click on this, we'll see that some work has been done, right? All of a sudden we've got these red layers showing up, these squares where those pins used to be, and actually 3 new layers have appeared. We've got B puppet pin 1, B puppet pin 2, B puppet pin 3. And the B stands for a bone. So this is, in DUIK, this is called a bone. Now, the names aren't very good, and for this to work correctly, we need to name the bones so that when we create the rig, we can remember which bone belonged to which body part. And if we name them in a right way, DUIK can make some predictions and try to auto-select the bones for us, which can save a lot of time in the rigging process. So let's try to follow a convention that they typically use. Alright, now this was the left arm, and it's sort of like our left, not the character's left. And so if I select, let's say, B puppet pin 1 and hit enter to rename, right, this was the left arm, so I'm going to use L to denote left arm, and I'm going to say shoulder. And we'll do the same thing, rename our other 2 pins. I'll grab the middle one, this will be L elbow, and I'll grab the bottommost one, this is going to be L hand. Okay, now if I want to create puppet pins on my next arm, I'm simply going to turn off L arm. I'll turn on R arm by soloing it. I can maybe turn these bones off for now. And I want to make sure that the layer itself is active before I start placing pins. Alright, we'll do the exact same thing. 3 pins, then find them in mesh 1, select the pins, use the bones to create 3 more bones, and before we do anything else, we got to name them appropriately. So I'm going to find this one. Since we're on the right arm now, I'm going to say R shoulder. The middle one is going to be R elbow. And the last one is going to be R hand. Again, I'll unsolo all those layers. And so we've basically got the arms taken care of. Next, let's solo one of the legs. We'll take the left leg, make sure we make it active before we try to place any pins. And we'll do the same thing. Place a pin at the end, in the middle, and at the other end point. In the layer palette, we'll go and find those pins and turn them into bones. And then we'll name them. So the first one is going to be, this is the left leg, so we'll say L thigh. For the middle one, we'll call it L knee. And for the last one, we'll call it L foot. And I'll toggle those 3 layers and the leg itself off. And we'll go to the right leg. Alright, so I'll solo the right leg. Make sure that it's active. This is important, otherwise the pins are going to try to place on a mesh of a different layer. That's one source of problem sometimes. So make sure that we always have this selected before we place our pins. And then we can place the 3 that we want. Go down into the deform area. Convert those 3 pins into bones. And then we'll name those as well. Using the exact same convention. This is the right leg, so right thigh. Right knee. Right foot. And then we'll turn those 3 bones and the layer off. Or the solo off so we can see our whole character. Right, so we're actually getting pretty close. The only thing left is the body. So let's solo the body layer. Now, and let's make it active as well. This is a sort of a combination of a body and a head together. Right, most rigs will actually sort of have the body as a layer, and maybe the head as its own layer, and even maybe hair might be its own layer as well. In this character, I'd kind of thought about maybe making the glasses their own layer so that we could have the glasses kind of move and give some dynamics to the character. But to keep it very simple, I've actually created just one solid body layer that includes the face. And so when we're creating the bones on this character, we're just going to put one down where the hips or the pelvis would be. We'll put one up around where the neck would be, and then one sort of in the middle of the head. Right? And this is the sort of thing where you can always experiment with more When we do the auto rigging, you'll see that for the body, you could have more bones if you wanted to simulate kind of different vertebrae along the spine, right? We're not limited to just doing a neck and a head. We could have several bones in the neck if it was some creature with a long neck, but this bean character doesn't have a very long neck, so I think one bone should be fine. So let's create those puppet pins, turn them into bones, and we'll do our last bit of naming here. I'm going to take the bottom one, call it hips, the middle one, call it neck, and the top one, call it head. Right, and if we were to select the neck, and I'll grab the selection tool now so I don't create any new pins, right, we can see that this gives us some kind of control over the orientation of our character, right, and it does some kind of funny deformations as well. Now I'll unsolo that and we'll look at what's going on in the layers palette. Right, our character has all the bones. It's not actually rigged yet, but we've kind of put the building blocks in place. Now the layers palette's a little scary. So what I'd like to do is actually make some of these layers disappear. Now we can't get rid of them. We need all these bones, but we don't need to see them all the time. And After Effects has a nice capability to make a layer shy and to toggle it off. And that's this icon here, just to the right of the layer name. And if you can't see that, it may be one of these options down here where we can collapse or expand all the different switches for layers. Right? You can, if we're not using any of them, we can save some workspace for different things. So make sure that it is expanded. And for each of the bone layers, so those are the red colored layers, let's click on this shy guy. And you can see it's this dude with kind of a nose that's sticking over a wall. And if you click on him, he hides behind the wall. Now the layers are still here. In fact, I might say let's make these bones also invisible. Right? We can't get rid of them, but once we've rigged our character, they'll sort of be in the way. So we don't really want to see them either. So we'll both make the layers not visible and shy. And if I want to toggle whether or not I see shy layers, that's the control up here. This hides the layers for which the shy switch has been set. So if I click on that, all those bone layers now aren't being displayed, and it makes our workspace quite a bit easier to deal with. Okay, now we're ready to rig. We're going to go back into DUIK, and now that we've created all those bones, we're going to click on the Auto Rig button. Now it asks us right off the bat, what type of rig should we make? An ungulate, a digitigrade, or a plantigrade? And if you mouse over those, you can see the different classifications of animals that fall into each of these categories. So if they're like hooved animals, they'd be ungulates. Digitigrades are dogs, cats, dinosaurs. Plantigrades, bears, humans, primates. This is a kind of like a human character, so we'll keep a plantigrade, and we'll say this is going to be a full character. Now when I click on that, it's going to bring up the back leg auto rig. Now this is a two-legged character. We can imagine that the legs that we're standing on are still kind of the back legs. So this is going to be the back left leg. So it would be kind of the layer that we had named L leg. And it's going to try to populate these different areas with the correct layer. And we can see for thigh, it's found L thigh. For the knee, it's found L knee. And for the foot, it's found L foot. Now, depending on the complexity, we may have more things, right? We may have claws or a hoof or toes. And if we want to even have like the foot be able to do foot rolling, where it's kind of like bending in the middle of the foot, we could have created some null objects. Again, this is for a more complicated rig. For us, 3 is enough. And these are the right 3. So all I have to do is hit next. And we'll look and see for the right leg, it's already chosen the correct layers. R thigh, R knee, R foot. So that one's good to go as well. Now when it switches to the front leg, so these are our arms, we can see that it's made a couple mistakes. Right? For instance, for the shoulder blade or clavicle, it has chosen L thigh, which is definitely has nothing to do with the arm at all. And we didn't really put a bone for a shoulder blade, kind of where the arm would attach behind there. So let's take that drop down menu and choose none. We can also see for the shoulder, it's chosen the knee. Again, that's a mistake, so we may have to make a few revisions here. I'm going to go and look for L shoulder, which for me is layer 3. And the other two look good. L elbow, L hand. Now when I hit next, probably I'm going to see the same mistakes, right? It usually follows the same convention for both. So since I don't have that shoulder blade, we'll switch it to none. Since the knee is not the shoulder, I'm going to find our shoulder, which in my case is 19. And these ones are looking pretty good, so I'll hit next. Second last, we have the spine auto rig, where we can see it's chosen the head correctly. For the neck, we can see here there could be like more than one bone or vertebrae for the neck, but we just have one. So we're going from layer neck to layer neck. We also didn't really give a bunch of like spinal bones in the torso, so we'll leave those empty. But for the hips or the pelvis, we had that one bone that we had called hips, and so that's looking pretty good. If I hit next, the last thing it's going to ask us is about a tail auto rig. And we can see here that using that same hips layer, we could attach some bones for some sort of a tail object. This character does not have a tail, so I'm just going to click remove all to tell it, please don't try to create a tail. And when I hit OK, After Effects is going to do some work to create a bunch of relationships and hopefully give us some controllers to manipulate this puppet. Sometimes it'll flip out to a different dialog window, so I'll just click back in here. And what we can see is it's created in our layers palette a bunch of additional layers, and these starred layers are what we call controllers. And a controller, if we're on our selection tool, we can grab a controller, and as we move it, it's going to manipulate the mesh in a sort of an interesting way. Now, as we move these legs, he looks a little bow-legged. Each of these layers, we have some ability to kind of set some properties, because it doesn't always know which way the character is facing, and it sure looks like the knee's bending the wrong way here. And so to get to the effects controls, we go back to Window and down to Effects Controls. In this case, I'm using the left foot controller. If I click on that, we just have a small amount of controls, but they're pretty important ones. The first one, clockwise, changes which way that appendage is going to bend. Alright, and so we can do this kind of for each of the appendages to make sure that they're bending the right way. I think that one looks like it's okay. This one looks like it's okay as well. So actually that's not so bad. Each of these controllers can be animated over time, and that's something that we'll be practicing in our assignment, where we'll take either this character or one that you create on your own, and we'll be animating some small sequences like a run cycle or a jump or something like that, just by animating the positions and rotations of those controllers over time. It really simplifies the whole animation process, and we can create some remarkable things.